Good afternoon again. This is Wyatt, and this presentation will be for Dr. Robertson's Motor Behavior KIN355 class, and this presentation is over motor control. Now, to begin, we should discuss an introduction to motor behavior, which is kind of just all movement associated with human behavior. Now, motor skills are actually goal-directed movements or intentional involuntary acts with outcome purpose in mind. Motor control is the execution and monitoring of those movements. So, some of the components of motor behavior. Sensory feedback is very, very important, and that comes from the peripheral nervous system within the sensory receptors. They detect stimuli and send it back. Perception is the interpretation that comes back within the CNS from those sensory endings. Perception can be different for everyone. How you perceive pain and how I perceive pain, totally different. Perception action coupling is essentially the perception of the movements at hand matched with the movement actions. When we're defining motor skills, we can really give them three essential attributes, which are skill, which is the actual quality of that performance, ability, which is the capacity of an individual regarding performance, and talent, which are supposed genetic abilities contributing to performance. Now, as we discussed in class, one of those, the only ones that are available for that are height. But there are four main processes involved in movement, as we know, which are planning, initiating, executing, and monitoring, in that order, and back around. Organization of the nervous system. So we start with the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, which is the command center of the whole body. Outside of that, outside of those two portions, we have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS, which has sensory neurons and motor neurons. Action potential is actually the bioelectrical impulses which communicate among those pathways. For the feed-forward schematic, there's motor planning and motor initiating within that. And those, then it goes down into motor commands, effectors, and the movements and the environment. For the anatomical schematic, we have the association cortex, the motor cortex, brainstem, spinal cord, and then the muscles and the movement. Execution of movement. Neuromechanics is the neural control of movement and output of muscle. A motor unit is the smallest unit of movement controlled by the CNS. The all or none principle is that all muscle fibers contract or zero do. And the size principle of recruitment, which is one of the other most important, are that all muscle fibers contract from small to large. Now, for the force control, or force output control, there are three major factors, and that was the recruitment of motor skills, the rate coding of motor units, and the coordination of motor units. In monitoring movement, the previous steps listed cannot run smoothly without information going back to the CNS and constantly rethinking what they're doing. The sensory division of the peripheral nervous system is responsible for monitoring and relaying information back into the CNS. Reflexes are not goal-directed movements, which means they are not motor skills because they have to seek an outcome. Sensory receptors. So within somatoreceptors, we have proprioceptors. They provide ongoing information to the CNS and are designed to detect movement. They're located in the muscles, tendons, ligaments, and especially tissues around the joints. All right, so important proprioceptors. There are sensory endings in muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, GTOs, vestibular apparatus, and the joint receptors, which are actually going to be right here in this schematic. Now, for the visual systems, this is the most dominant feedback information to the brain. It is the most important on seeking out environmental constraints, and it has feedback of ongoing movements and of movement execution. Focal vision and ambient vision are very, very important within these visual systems, while ambient vision directs postural correction and balance control. Visual search is anticipation of information processing, while optical flow is an influx of changing light. Within optical flow is top, which is the rate of change of size of an object. So when a baseball is coming toward you, you can see the velocity. And this allows for anticipation timing, so whenever someone's trying to swing a bat. Some of the movement models, we have open loop and closed loop. Open loop is feed forward, and closed loop is feedback, as we can see here. Closed loop and hierarchical. These are the simplest models. They say reflex actions form complex behaviors. CPGs, central pattern generators, have rhythmic patterns contained within the spinal cord. So if your spinal cord, or if the brainstem is detached, you can still have those within a species. These include walking, swimming, etc. And these use synergies to have muscles and limbs form function. So for open loop and hierarchical models, the schema theory, which has generalized motor programs within it, which those have invariant characteristics and parameters. Handwriting, being able to switch over from the right and left hand, is how we can see that working. The strip talk down approach is how this works, where sensory information eventually loops back around to the top. Now, for the dynamic systems theory, movement emerges from three things: the individual, task, and the environment. Within those are several different characteristics. The primary system for performance change, systems self-organize. There are constraints which are brought on by the environment and determined by perceptual systems. Affordances can be found by working past these constraints and the actions that can take place.